drone swarm warfare, claiming that a single operator can now control more than 200 drones at once, carrying out reconnaissance, jamming, deception, and strike missions against multiple targets.
200 drones versus one aircraft carrier strike group. The outcome was faster and far more brutal than anyone expected. A massive drone swarm attack is one of the biggest threats modern navies face.
FBI alert warning Iran could launch drones that could impact the West Coast.
Law enforcement agencies across the state about a potential Iranian drone attack off the West Coast, and that is sparking security concerns.
Now imagine 200 drones targeting a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group at once. What followed was a high-speed battle of radar systems, missile defenses, and naval firepower, a confrontation that shows just how dangerous modern drone warfare has become. Follow along as we break down how carrier defenses responded, and subscribe if you want to understand the real story behind moments like this, not just what flashes across the news. Let's go. The USS Abraham Lincoln, America's crown jewel in hostile waters. To understand the story, you first need to know what the USS Abraham Lincoln actually is. This is not just a big ship. It is a floating city, 1,100 feet long, nuclear-powered, and capable of carrying roughly 5,500 sailors at a time. Lincoln is one of just 11 U.S. Navy carriers and is meant to be a crown jewel of U.S. military might. When deployed, the 36-year-old carrier is a small town in and of itself, hosting roughly 5,500 sailors, and is part of a carrier air wing that includes a host of fighter jet squadrons, electronic attack and reconnaissance aircraft, and helicopters. The Lincoln had been stationed in the South China Sea before being rapidly repositioned to the Middle East, as tensions with Iran began rising sharply in early 2026. The USS Abraham Lincoln arrived in the region from the South China Sea just days before the drone confrontation. Trump had deployed Abraham Lincoln to the Middle East as he threatened Iran with strikes if it did not negotiate a deal over its nuclear program. So this wasn't a routine patrol. This was a deliberate show of force, a message being sent to Tehran in the form of a 100,000 tons nuclear-powered aircraft carrier sitting 500 miles off Iran's southern coast. The carrier wasn't sailing alone either. It was accompanied by guided missile destroyers, support vessels, and an entire carrier strike group. That is how the United States Navy deploys when it means business. A carrier strike group is essentially a self-contained naval battle force, capable of projecting air power hundreds of miles in every direction, striking land targets deep inside enemy territory, and defending against both air and sea threats simultaneously. It is the most powerful conventional military force structure ever assembled by any nation. The warning signs. Months before the shooting started. The confrontation that eventually exploded into full-scale war in late February 2026 didn't come out of nowhere. There were months of escalating incidents, provocations, and near misses that made the eventual collision feel almost inevitable in retrospect. As early as February 3, 2026, U.S. forces shot down an Iranian drone as it aggressively approached the USS Abraham Lincoln, which was transiting the Arabian Sea about 500 miles from Iran's southern coast. The drone had successfully transmitted its surveillance and reconnaissance footage to its operators at the IRGC command center before it was lost. That detail is important. The drone got its footage before it was shot down. Iran was watching. It was learning the carrier's position, its patrol patterns, and the response times of its air defenses. The Lincoln was about 500 miles from Iran's southern coast when the unmanned aircraft unnecessarily maneuvered toward the ship. U.S. forces were operating in international waters and took de-escalatory measures, but the drone continued to fly toward the aircraft carrier. An F-35C warplane from the Abraham Lincoln shot down the drone in self-defense to protect the aircraft carrier and personnel on board. No U.S. personnel were harmed, and no U.S. equipment was damaged. The F-35C is one of the most advanced fighter jets in the world, and it took it down cleanly. But this was just the opening act. Hours after the drone encounter, a U.S. Navy destroyer came to the assistance of a U.S.-flagged tanker that was harassed by multiple Iranian small boats as it transited the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Central Command said that Iranian craft had threatened to board and seize the tanker as it transited through the strait. So within the same 24-hour period, you had Iran probing the carrier's defenses with a drone and simultaneously threatening to seize a U.S. commercial vessel. That was the temperature in early February, before the actual war had even started. Iran's drone strategy. Why swarms are terrifying. To understand why a drone swarm targeting an aircraft carrier is such a serious threat, you need to understand how Iran built its drone program and why military analysts were so worried about it. Iran's Shahed drones are long-range, one-way attack drones capable of carrying more than 100 pounds of explosives. Russia has used large numbers of them to carry out destructive long-range attacks inside of Ukraine. The world already had a front-row seat to what these drones could do in a real war. Ukraine had been getting hammered by them for years. They are cheap, they fly low, they are hard to detect on radar, and when you send dozens or hundreds of them at once, they overwhelm even sophisticated air defense systems. Iran had spent years refining this exact strategy. The idea is not to sink a carrier with one massive missile the way you would in a traditional naval engagement. The idea is to flood the target's defenses with so many simultaneous threats from so many different directions that the defense systems simply cannot keep up. You shoot down 150 of them, but 3 get through. And 3 Shahed drones hitting an aircraft carrier, each carrying over 100 pounds of explosives, could ignite fuel, kill sailors, and potentially disable flight operations. That is the nightmare scenario the US Navy had been planning against. Iran had also developed what it called its Shahab series and newer variants, and had invested heavily in drone production capacity. Intelligence estimates suggested Iran had built up stockpiles numbering in the tens of thousands of drones across its military. During the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury, Iran launched missile and drone attacks targeting the American aircraft carrier, USS Abraham Lincoln, but failed to hit the ship. No US Navy ships were struck, and the fleet remained fully operational. The attack happened, it just didn't land. The Shahed Bagheri, Iran's floating drone mothership. Here is where the story gets really interesting, because Iran wasn't just launching drones from the coast. It had built something extraordinary, a purpose-built drone carrier designed to project its unmanned strike capability far out into the open ocean. The Iris Shahed Bagheri is a drone carrier operated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Navy. It is the result of a 2022 to 2024 conversion of the container ship Iranian, to which was added an angled flight deck with a ski jump, in the manner of light aircraft carriers. The ship is the first full-service UAV carrier of the IRGC Navy. It was commissioned on February 6, 2025, so this was a brand new ship, barely a year old when the war broke out. Iran had taken an ordinary commercial cargo vessel, spent 2 years gutting and rebuilding it, and turned it into a weapons platform that had no real equivalent anywhere else in the world. Commissioned in February 2025, the Shahed Bagheri was created by converting the former container vessel Iranian into a 240-meter, 40,000-ton-plus aviation support platform with an angled deck, a ski jump launch ramp, and an approximately 180-meter runway for drones. Open-source reporting on its commissioning showed helicopters and UAVs parked on deck, confirming that Iran intended it to function as a real sea-based aviation node rather than a symbolic hulk. Think about what that means practically. Iran had a ship sitting in the Gulf of Oman that could independently launch drone swarms, receive them back, refuel them, and send them out again, all while being hundreds of miles from shore. According to Iranian reports, the Shahed Bagheri can carry several squadrons of drones and deploy up to 60 drones used for reconnaissance and attack missions. In addition to the aircraft on board, it is reportedly equipped with air defense systems and anti-ship missiles, and carries dozens of fast attack boats. These boats are used by Iran to carry out maritime attacks, either with personnel on board or as explosive-laden suicide vessels. Beyond its offensive and defensive capabilities, the drone carrier also served as a forward logistics base for the naval forces of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard. This was not just a drone launcher. It was a complete, self-contained mobile naval warfare platform. Operation Epic Fury, how it actually began. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched one of the most sweeping and precisely coordinated military operations since the Second World War. They called it Operation Epic Fury, and it started not with a warning shot, but with a hammer blow aimed directly at the top of Iran's entire power structure. Operation Epic Fury was launched on February 28, 2026, involving coordinated strikes by U.S. and partner forces against Iranian military assets. The campaign's stated objectives include eliminating Iran's nuclear capabilities, destroying its ballistic missile arsenal, and degrading military assets. Initial strikes killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and other senior officials. The very first strikes of the operation killed Iran's supreme leader. That is how this began, not with a limited strike on a military base or a missile depot, but with a direct hit on the head of the Iranian state. A senior U.S. official confirmed that the United States, during the first 12 hours of Operation Epic Fury, carried out 900 strikes against Iranian targets. The Israeli military also confirmed that 200 of its jets hit nearly 500 targets in Iran on the first day of the operation. 900 American strikes in 12 hours. That is an almost incomprehensible pace of attacks. Tomahawk cruise missiles, B-2 stealth bombers, F-35s, F-A-18 Super Hornets. The full weight of American air power was brought to bear simultaneously across the entire country. The overarching mission for Epic Fury, according to CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper, was to eliminate Iran's ability to threaten Americans. He noted that U.S. objectives included destroying Iran's naval headquarters and degrading its entire naval asset structure in the Gulf. And the naval dimension of this campaign, the battle at sea involving drones, carriers, and warships, was one of the most intense parts of the whole operation. Iran fires back, targeting the Lincoln. When the strikes began, Iran did exactly what military planners had expected. It launched a massive retaliatory campaign using its drone and missile arsenal. The USS Abraham Lincoln, sitting in the Gulf of Oman and actively conducting strikes on Iran, was one of the primary targets. Iran's military retaliated against the joint operation, launching missile and drone attacks targeting the American aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, but failed to hit the ship. No U.S. Navy ships were struck, and the fleet remained fully operational. Iran threw its best shot at the most recognizable symbol of American naval power and missed. The carrier's air defense systems, the escort destroyers surrounding it, and the combat air patrol flying overhead worked exactly as designed. Iran State TV reported that drones fired by the Revolutionary Guards had struck the aircraft carrier. However, a U.S. defense official flatly said, "The reports are not true." The Pentagon added that the missiles Iran launched didn't even come close to the carrier. Iran went on Iranian state television and announced, to its own population and to the world, that it had successfully struck a U.S. aircraft carrier. This was not a small exaggeration. This was a completely fabricated claim about one of the most closely watched military assets on Earth. Satellite imagery, U.S. Navy photographs, and continued flight operations from the Lincoln all confirmed it was exactly where it was supposed to be and completely undamaged. Iran, in fact, claimed 5 days in a row that it had sunk the USS Abraham Lincoln. CENTCOM pushed back directly, issuing a statement noting that the Iranian regime's false messaging machine continues to falsely claim that it has sunk a U.S. aircraft carrier. Later, Iran shifted its story and claimed the carrier had left the battlefield after encountering Iranian missiles and drones. First, it was sunk. Then, when the carrier kept operating, Iran's story quietly changed. Now, it had simply been driven away. Neither was true. The Lincoln kept flying combat sorties throughout. The American counter, hitting the mothership. While Iran was announcing victories that never happened, the United States moved quickly to target one of Tehran's most prized naval assets. As soon as Operation Epic Fury began, American forces focused on the Shahid Bagheri, Iran's drone carrier designed to extend its military reach across open waters. The ship had been presented by Iran as a centerpiece of its naval strategy, a platform capable of launching drones and supporting operations far beyond the Persian Gulf. According to CENTCOM, U.S. forces struck the Iris Shahid Bagheri in the Persian Gulf within hours of the operation's launch on February 28, 2026. The vessel reportedly suffered critical damage and began sinking. The strike was one of the first major actions of the campaign and demonstrated how quickly the operation unfolded.
This is probably America's best strike so far. You can see that it's hit twice, both of them scoring direct hits on the ship. About 20 or more Iranian naval vessels are reported sunk so far.
A ship Iran had spent 2 years developing, promoted as a breakthrough in its naval doctrine, was burning and going down before it ever had the chance to fully deploy its drone capabilities. CENTCOM releases the video, and it is brutal. On March 5th and 6th, 2026, U.S. Central Command did something it doesn't always do in active conflicts. It released actual footage of the strike on the Shahid Bagheri for the world to watch. U.S. Central Command released video footage on March 5, 2026, depicting strikes against the Iranian drone carrier Shahid Bagheri in the Gulf. The footage shows the vessel sustaining 2 impacts, one amidships on the port side and another on the port quarter, with visible fires burning aboard the ship. The video release came 3 days after CENTCOM first announced it had conducted strikes against the Shahid Bagheri on March 2nd. This was deliberate. CENTCOM released this footage specifically in response to Iran's claims that it had sunk an American carrier. The message was clear: here is the only carrier burning, and it's yours. No drones or helicopters appeared to be on the vessel's flight deck at the time of the strike. This was the second known attack against the Shahid Bagheri. On March 2nd, CENTCOM said it had been struck in the early hours of Operation Epic Fury, in a post debunking Iranian claims about the sinking of a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier. So, the ship was hit twice. The first strike damaged it severely. Days later, U.S. forces came back and hit it again. Whatever remained of this vessel after the first strike was methodically finished off in the second. The CENTCOM video post was overlaid with a statement that called Iran's claims a false messaging machine. Unusually blunt language for official military communications, but the context made it completely understandable. The March 6th video adds an important technical clue, even if it does not identify the weapon. The footage shows a major amidships impact and subsequent heavy fire, and visually appears to include an initial strike followed by a second event, with the first producing the more dramatic immediate smoke plume. Watching the footage, it is genuinely difficult to believe this was a ship that Iran's own military chief had described just months earlier as capable of operating independently anywhere in the world's oceans. Iran strikes Gulf, neighbors, the wider catastrophe. As strikes against Iranian military infrastructure intensified, the conflict quickly expanded beyond a direct confrontation between the United States and Iran. The IRGC launched retaliatory missile and drone attacks across the region, targeting multiple countries aligned with the United States. In the first 12 hours alone, Iran reportedly launched around 420 missiles toward targets across 9 countries and vessels at sea. Among those attacks were approximately 162 missiles fired toward Israel and 167 missiles aimed at the UAE, while other strikes targeted regional infrastructure and maritime traffic. Iranian drones also struck the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, marking a significant escalation by hitting a diplomatic facility. Across the region, from Doha to Bahrain and parts of Israel, explosions and missile impacts were reported, with civilian areas affected as the conflict spread rapidly across multiple fronts. Iran's navy dismantled in 48 hours. While missile exchanges dominated headlines, a major shift was happening at sea. U.S. and allied forces were systematically targeting Iran's naval capabilities, dramatically reducing the operational strength of the IRGC Navy. According to CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper, more than 30 Iranian ships were sunk or destroyed during the early phase of the campaign, including vessels operating in the Gulf of Oman. At the same time, the broader military campaign targeted Iran's ability to continue producing weapons. Officials reported that ballistic missile attacks had fallen by 90% and drone attacks by 83% compared to the opening day of the operation. The strategy extended beyond disabling active units. It focused on destroying factories, storage sites, and production facilities. By targeting the entire supply chain behind Iran's missile and drone programs, the operation aimed to prevent those capabilities from being rebuilt in the future. The information war, Iran's propaganda machine, goes into overdrive. Alongside the shooting war, a parallel battle unfolded across social media, state television, and diplomatic channels. In that information war, Iran's performance was widely seen as even weaker than its showing on the battlefield. For 5 consecutive days, Iranian sources claimed they had sunk the USS Abraham Lincoln, repeating the same declaration, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. CENTCOM responded with photographs, video footage, and direct statements confirming the carrier was untouched, and that no missiles came close. In an unusually blunt message, CENTCOM described Iran's narrative as a false messaging machine, noting that the only carrier struck was Iran's own drone carrier, Shahid Bagheri, hit within hours of Operation Epic Fury. The episode raised an uncomfortable question. Was this propaganda aimed at the world, or mainly at Iran's own population, with limited ways to verify events at sea? What Iran's drone carrier was actually designed to do. The destruction of the Shahid Bagheri was more than a tactical victory. The vessel represented Iran's most ambitious naval project, designed to extend its reach far beyond the Persian Gulf. Tehran envisioned a mobile platform capable of launching surveillance drones, one-way attack drones, and helicopters deep into the Gulf of Oman, the Arabian Sea, and potentially the wider Indian Ocean. Iranian reports suggested the ship could remain at sea for up to 1 year, travel roughly 19,000 to 22,000 nautical miles without port refueling, and carry up to 60 drones alongside fast missile craft. Analysts believed it could also support signals intelligence and unmanned subsurface systems. In practice, the Bagheri would have acted as a floating command center for drone swarms and maritime surveillance, essentially Iran's attempt to create a carrier-style power projection system built around relatively cheap unmanned weapons. The F-35C's role, the fighter that kept the carrier safe. Throughout the confrontation, one aircraft repeatedly appeared as the USS Abraham Lincoln's frontline defense, the F-35C, the carrier-based version of the United States stealth fighter. In February, when a Shahed 139 drone approached the carrier roughly 500 miles from Iran's southern coast, an F-35C from the Lincoln intercepted and destroyed it before it could pose a serious threat. Using a fighter jet to shoot down a drone is not always the most efficient defense, but it demonstrates the carrier's ability to eliminate threats long before they approach the ship itself. With around 5,500 sailors on board and a full carrier air wing constantly flying combat air patrols, the Lincoln operates as a layered defensive system. Aircraft circle at multiple distances and altitudes, ready to intercept incoming threats hours before they reach the carrier group. The scale of destruction. Numbers that tell the story. The numbers from the first week of Operation Epic Fury reveal an engagement far larger than many reports initially suggested. Within the final 72 hours of that opening week, U.S. bomber forces struck nearly 200 targets across Iran, including sites near Tehran. In the last hour of that period alone, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers dropped dozens of 2,000-pound penetrator bombs against deeply buried ballistic missile launch sites. During the first 12 hours of the operation, the United States conducted roughly 900 strikes, while Iran launched about 420 missiles toward targets across the region. These included 162 missiles toward Israel, 167 toward the UAE, and 46 toward Qatar. By the sixth day, CENTCOM reported missile attacks had fallen by 90% and drone attacks by 83%, while more than 30 Iranian naval vessels had been destroyed or sunk. The pace of degradation was rapid, and by that point, Iran's ability to mount large drone swarm attacks had largely collapsed. Iran unveiled a drone carrier and claimed attacks on the USS Abraham Lincoln, even declaring it sunk. None was true. U.S. forces struck the carrier Shahid Bagheri and destroyed over 30 Iranian vessels in days. Drone and missile attacks collapsed. The question now, will Iran change strategy or rebuild and return stronger? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to follow this story as it develops, hit subscribe. We're covering every update as it happens.